training every new hire that virtually walks in through our front door. Prior to this, I worked on the implementation side and dabbled in some sales, and now I am training everyone. I started this position as of March 16th, 2020, which is roughly around the same time that San Francisco's Mayor London Breed put shelter in place into effect. As you can see here, we developed an app just for shelter in place. What you see on this first slide is our headcount from as of March 1st, 2020. This includes every office in our Western Hemisphere. This is Odoo Inc. San Francisco, Buffalo, New York, and Mexico City, Mexico. As of this recording, I've trained roughly around 130 new and current employees through the 2-week training structure. Now, of course, this is something we've never done before. We have no work from home policy, so we really had to adapt how we approach onboarding and training everybody on the product. And so, on average, we had anywhere between 3 to 16 attendees in each training session, but average around 8. And what I'll be doing with this presentation is sharing my experience with this virtual onboarding, the mistakes I've made, what I've learned, and how we're going to approach it moving forward. I'd like to take a moment to recognize everybody who attended, because Odoo is built on feedback and communication, and so without the positive feedback or even the criticism they provided at the end of each session, the training wouldn't be where it is today. So this feedback is vital for our growth, and so I always welcome it. So thank you everybody who attended. Now the initial design was relatively straightforward. I had a lot of content to build on. I used my experience in implementation and sales, but also the e-learning platform that we have with all that great content, thank you Amy, to really build it. It would actually really build itself. And you'll see how that looks moving forward. So started small and easy, something with the beginning of the workflow that most businesses go through, such as CRM and sales. Learning those modules really helped them learn the next one, and so we a la carte piecemealed from there with purchase, then inventory, manufacturing, and then of course everyone's favorite, accounting. And so once you learn those core modules, everything else is a lot easier. Really, the goal with this was focusing on the cascade effect that you can see natively with Odoo. And by cascade, I'm not talking about the music group. I'm talking about the fact that you can have a sales order create a manufacturing order, which triggers a purchase order, and going right back up that workflow. This automation is really the value added that Odoo provides and should be showcased with every presentation. Now we also really leverage Odoo's simple, easy to use UI. Everything looks similar, everything's built the same way. So as you navigate Odoo, it's not unfamiliar territory. We have the sales order that looks like the manufacturing order, that looks just like the purchase order. And so we did approach it from that step ladder a la carte manner. And so as it stands, we've gone through 2 main iterations of the training, and I'll explain these next. The first iteration was the tried and true Socratic method that we're all familiar with. I lecture, I ask them questions, they ask me questions, I ask questions back, really hoping for an open learning environment to give them the opportunity and confidence to speak up and learn the platform, because it's quite complex. And so the goal, of course, is to make it as engaging as possible, because listening to someone lecture for 4 hours is not fun. And so the best way to approach it, of course, is to help them understand the business concepts behind the software. Learning it, how it works, and its behavior is all well and good, but if you can't really understand it and apply it, it doesn't really help you that much. And so, of course, they ask me questions about how the features work, and I ask them questions back to fully understand their understanding and logic. The goal, of course, as I mentioned, dynamic and interactive. The way to help them learn it better is to help them approach it like an expert, know where to go to navigate, to answer questions that they might not know. And so we really leaned on as well the scale-up game to throw that in there, because it allowed for a dynamic and interactive approach and really brought in some real-life context. The advantage with this approach was that I had a lot more control over what material they're learning and how they're learning it. Now, the downside of this approach is that it's tiring. Speaking for 4 hours is tiring for me, but also them. Ultimately, it was not scalable. So the second approach we took is a more self-guided approach. I put together a syllabus, a rubric, with videos and documentation and other resources that they would follow along. And then we'd meet for 2 hours a day with an open and active Q&A session where I got to talk about certain topics that I think are relevant, and they also just open-ended questions. Again, the goal here was scalability. The advantage of this is that it allows them to go at their own pace. They can pause the videos, they can rewind, they can fast forward, and they can also have Odoo open another monitor so they can follow along, adding and building that muscle memory. Now the challenge with this, though, again, less control over the content they're learning, and of course there's not enough of my ability to kind of engage them to think more like an expert during those 2 hours each day. So there's more room for improvement. Now, regardless of how I teach, there's still two main challenges here. The first is how to make it as engaging and interactive as possible while simultaneously helping them improve their understanding and memory retention. I wish I had an answer to all these questions, something simple like you can trust them, but I don't have the answer quite yet. However, I do believe that the best way to approach this is to, again, approach it from the business concepts more than the functional features. So, real-world use cases. It's really important to contextualize the real-world use cases into software, or contextualize Odoo into real-world use cases so you can understand why or how it works. It also helps because you can relate with the material far better. If you can draw from your previous experiences, you have a real connection to what this feature does and how it behaves. You can then, of course, draw on that really quickly. It makes it simple. There's no need to memorize anymore because you've lived it. And if you've been through implementation or you are implementing, you know that, or you recognize that every requirement that comes up usually starts with "tell me more." What does it do? What do you need it for? What's the business use case? What's the application? What's the volume? Etc. And so because Odoo is an ERP software, there are many different iterations or many different ways of assembling and putting it together. And so that's why it's so key to ask these questions and understand the why before you can go into the how. And so also real-world scenarios help with the influx of all this information. And to aid with the contextualization is the scale-up game. It takes a story, something you can apply it to, you can go through it, and build some muscle memory, and you work together in groups to solve the problem, or solve the puzzle. This is quite effective for, again, muscle memory, contextualizing the software, and it's been a crowd favorite across the board. Everyone loves it, and it's great. And hopefully we can expand on it further with more use cases and more challenging ones. Again, very hands-on, very interactive, best way to learn. Now, that's followed by a demo, where they present a presentation or a demo based on, you guessed it, a real use case. I put together a prompt. They use the videos, documentation to put together this demo and then present at the end of the week to the rest of the group as well as me. And of course, provide some positive, constructive criticism or feedback as well. Now, the thing is about this is we followed Odoo's 80-20 rule. If you're not familiar or forget, the 80-20 rule essentially is that we try to implement 80% of a business requirements out of the box, with the remaining 20% done either via A, customization, which, by the way, none of them are required or asked to do, or B, the often more ignored approach is process adjustments. So some of the requirements weren't necessarily straightforward. Some of the requirements weren't solved with a software solution. Maybe it was more of a process adjustment of how to approach the software. And so that was a good way to challenge their thinking, getting them to think critically and analytically, but also some of the requirements did have multiple solutions. So it really depended on how they wanted to approach it and what story they wanted to tell, because again, story is everything, the business application. So as the old saying goes, you retain 10% of what you hear, 20% of what you see, and 70% of what you teach. Now, it's important that you never underestimate the power of an active Q&A session. Anybody can hold a Q&A session asking questions and answering them, of course. But an active Q&A session is more involved, where they ask a question, and regardless of complexity, you ask a question back. The intent with asking a question back, while it may be frustrating and annoying for some, is to get you to think about the answer yourself, come up with a solution yourself, because the more you come up with the answer yourself, the more you speak out these answers yourself, the quicker you'll learn. Quickly you'll memorize things. And so it's more about helping them build the confidence to come up with their own answers, because we do all have our own experiences. Even if we have to guess, we can draw from those experiences to come up with a solution. It helps reinforce your knowledge, improves memory retention, and it's vital to further growth. And so I also sometimes even ask simple no-brainer questions that may be very simple on the surface, and they are, but the goal with that was to get them to say the answer aloud. Because if you say the answer aloud, you're more likely to remember it again. Now, at the end of the day, though, I tell my students that context is king or queen. Understanding the why helps you understand the how and the what. And so it paints a story. And so the use cases and demos and games can only get you so far. So again, context is everything. Now, while there's so much I can do or try to control for, I can't do everything. A lot of it does rely on the students, how engaged they are, how much they want to participate, how much they want to take out of it. So the more they put in, the more they get out. And we can't really control for this too much. And so what you should be doing is looking for those hard-to-teach qualities when you're in recruitment. I certainly did. And so you should be screening everybody to look for these hard-to-teach qualities. And so the next few slides will cover what I recommend everyone think about or how to approach the software in order to learn it best. First is, again, a translation from concept to context. I'm going to beat a dead horse here. Essentially, understanding the why behind the software helps retain information far greater than just understanding what the button does. Why over the how. It's very important, that's why I keep repeating it. From there, let me take a quick step back. Of course, this is more challenging for those who don't have as much experience in the workforce, but that doesn't mean you don't have valuable experience. So it's always good and important to draw from them. Next is being curious. Now, it's not a requirement, but being curious helps you dive into software a little bit more and spend a bit more time on it. Because the more curious you are, the more time you spend, the more muscle memory you generate, the more you retain that information. It's not something that can be taught. You have to be curious in your own nature, so find a reason to be curious yourself, whether it's you like software, whether you like helping businesses grow and evolve and adapt. Find whatever is your calling and go with it. Next, teach a man to fish. You learn more, or actually memorize more, if you spend time banging your head against the wall to understand how a feature works. More so than if you were to get the answer from me directly, like me feeding candy to you. It's probably delicious and healthy and happy right now, but long term it's not very healthy for you. So teach a man to fish goes a long way. It also helps you think critically and analytically, and really empowers the employees to just dive into the software. But of course, this goes hand in hand with curiosity and patience. Now, the next one is, I don't know is not a complete sentence. I'm not saying it's not okay to not know something. 100% it's okay to not know something. I don't know many great things. But what I mean by this is, by saying I don't know and stopping there, you're ending the conversation. There's really no more forward momentum to continue the discussion. You should be more approaching of, I don't know, but draw from your experience, because we all have it, and use that to come up with a solution. If you don't have a solution right then and there, whether you guess or not, come back later for it. Or I don't know, but, and try to figure out from there, even if you're wrong. This, of course, does require a certain level of self-efficacy or self-confidence in your own ability to come up with a solution or answer. And this is one of the things I really look for or try to push in people, because the more confidence they have, the more they're empowered to do things on their own. And the more you empower your employees, the more successful you become, because you're spending less time nurturing them. And now, this is what I've learned so far. And our goals keep evolving, because we have to try to learn and adapt the learning environment to people's learning style and their own pace. And so it's, again, logic over the details, the business use cases over the software itself. And of course, from here, we're trying to find ways to keep scaling this as we continue hiring, because it's not stopping. So in conclusion, though, remote training is challenging, but if done correctly, given the right environment, it can be just as rewarding as in person. So the right mindset is very critical here. That said, I do have some key advice for everyone who do need to approach learning or training from a remote setting. So the key fundamentals here is to empower your employees. That's essentially what we try to do every day. If you read our implementation methodology, our goal is to empower our clients, teach them to fish, train the trainer, make it so that you can implement work Odoo without needing to come back to us for more. And so I do have 3 key tenets for a positively conducive learning environment. First, questions are welcome, always. Large or small, doesn't matter, ask them. If they're confident enough or comfortable enough to approach you with these questions, don't stop them, let them keep coming, it doesn't matter. And then encourage them to learn the software themselves, ask questions back, teach them to fish. this provides a safe environment for anything and everything to come up, and of course, maybe requires some patience, but it is very worthwhile. The second tenet is, I don't know isn't a complete sentence. I'll mention it again. I don't know is an invitation to learn. We don't know something yet, but then that gives us opportunity to find something. We learn more from failing than we do from succeeding, so encourage the failure, because Odoo is not afraid of failing. We've probably failed many times at certain things. And so it's important to learn from them, grow, and evolve. Where Odoo draws the line is not evolving. And last but not least, again, teach them to fish. If they're brave enough to approach you, let them do so. Show them the way to solve for the question they have, and empower them to take their own action. So what's next? Well, the next iteration of the training is going to take a mini mock implementation approach. I'm going to build on the framework we have now to essentially give them a implementation that they go through every day, and then present their, what they've configured at the end of the week. Each phase of this implementation will also have a survey, a quiz, that's with the questions taken directly from the certification exam. So this gives more quantifiable results or measurements to see how well people are doing. Outside of that, I will also be reviewing online content to adding more information on our e-learning platform, our documentation. Hopefully, of course, going with the business concepts more than the software again. And if you have ideas, feedback on what we could talk about, how we can improve it, please send it my way. We can either talk about it in an open Q&A session after this, or you can email that to me directly, because as I always said, feedback is growth, and without it, we can't evolve. So, if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, thank you for joining me today. Really.
We have a lot of that in the Bay Area and in the Northeast Coast where Odoo hires. How do you provide them with the tools they need when they're coming from or with limited work experience, real life work experience?
I mean, some of that does require a little bit more work on their effort to think back on what they know. I mean, regardless of whether you have work experience or not, you've walked into a retail store.
Right.
And have you even had the thought about, okay, how do these products get on the shelf? Where do they come from? How do they move around? Where do you get more of it? Where do they come from? And so everyone has experience, and so all of it's valuable and insightful. Mm-hmm. So just draw from anything and everything. Mm-hmm. And use what you think makes the most sense. Some things are common sense in the world. Some things, or maybe feel like they're common sense. And so draw on them and just guess. Guessing is okay. Being wrong is okay, because that means that's how you figure out what you're missing, what information you don't have yet. And you learn more from being wrong and failure than being correct.
Right. So picking from different buckets, not just your resume,
exactly,
if you will. You may have those skills. That's very insightful. And this is a good question that they're asking us. How do you approach empowering employees to be self-sufficient and to build that can-do attitude, without the potential camaraderie that we normally have in a face-to-face office environment or work environment?
I think it boils down to self-efficacy or self-confidence, and coming up with, or having the idea that you could come up with a solution yourself, or that you have the ability to come up with a solution yourself. And so having them ask questions on a regular basis and feeling free to do so builds the confidence that, okay, I can say anything. Mm-hmm. And then asking questions back, guiding them to the answer, because if they say the answer themselves, that builds the confidence, okay, maybe I know what I'm talking about here, and kind of hardwire their brain to think, okay, right, I have the ability to say what I need to say, and I can come up with a solution. And then, of course, congratulating them or saying good job, making sure they realize that what they're actually doing is actually correct. And
Definitely. I think it touches on what you were mentioning earlier, like going back to basics.
Yeah.
What we learned in kindergarten, sort of,
Exactly.
Let's learn new stuff. Awesome. Related to this, they're also asking us, how do you transmit a sense of company culture and the times where we're remote,
Yeah, absolutely. I guess that really depends on how you define company culture. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's, of course, the physical company culture, how you interact with the people at work or outside of work and things of that nature. There's also the mindset. So feedback is always great. That's a company culture. Being able to provide feedback, ask questions, things of that nature, really, you need to promote that very early on. And so that's why I make sure in the trainings, I always ask for feedback. Every training session has a quiz, a questionnaire to get feedback. Mm-hmm. And I make sure to let them know that I'm don't know everything. Maybe there's something I'm doing wrong. So provide the feedback you need, and we'll learn and adapt. And feel free to be open and communicative about it. And that's just an example of how you can promote some of the company culture you're looking for.
Mm-hmm. Taking the journey together.
Exactly.
And really living it together. Great. They're asking us about Odoo specifically. How long does Odoo train new hires? I'm going to assume that's different for different departments as well.
So every department goes through this 2-week training, regardless if they're actually product facing or not, such as our marketing and our accounting and recruitment team.
Okay.
It's all 2 weeks. But that's just a crash course. There's no way that they can expect to learn everything in that 2 weeks. No one can. So really, training and learning never ends at Odoo, because there's the 2-week crash course, but then you're dealing with new businesses all the time, new clients, new requirements. Odoo comes out with new features every year.
Right.
I mean, we're at this event to showcase version 14.
I was
Last
thinking
year was
about
version
that,
13. So I'm learning new things all the time. Every day I'm learning something new, even on the go.
And for those that are not only product facing, but also customer facing,
right,
and interacting with their clientele, how long does it take for them to be productive, so to speak?
It's really hard to say. I mean, it depends on, are you fresh out of college, in which case you've probably never spoken to a client before in that regard, or have you been in the professional world for a bit and you already know how to communicate to clients. So it really depends on the profile we're hiring for, or who gets hired.
Okay.
But I mean, I believe everybody's getting in contact with a client or partner within the first month.
Right.
Sometimes even sooner than that. So we kind of just throw everyone into the deep end and we help them out.
All right, great. That's very, very comforting here. And how do you keep them engaged? Sort of to wrap up a little bit, how do you keep them engaged with the product and the company?
I try to ask a lot of questions. I try to add some humor and jokes into everything to make it less dry. Because Odoo can be very dry, especially certain topics like accounting. We all know what I'm talking about. So that's how I do it. Try to make sure their voice is heard.
All right. Keeping that curiosity alive.
Absolutely.
Great. There was also a little bit of heckling in the beginning of the chat. And someone is asking if you would be so kind to leave your phone number in the comments. Legitimate question, too. So I'll leave you with that. And again, thank you so much, Richard, for taking this very interesting subject in these times.
I appreciate it. Thank you guys, everybody.